It has frequently crossed my mind whether a global record exists for the pure, unmitigated audacity displayed by a homeowners association. If such a record is kept, I am convinced my former, unsolicited, and most decidedly unwelcome HOA might well have secured it. They did not merely flex the regulations. They shattered them, consigned them to a blaze, and reveled around the resulting inferno. And what was their ultimate reward for this spectacle of suburban folly? Let us just say it entailed a court order for $20 million. Indeed, you comprehended correctly, $20 million. It all commenced with such beauty and tranquility, which, I presume, is the typical beginning for the most compelling horror narratives. Is it not? A number of years ago, following a rather strenuous career crafting high-security luxury estates for individuals who prized their privacy as highly as their financial portfolios, I resolved it was time to create one for my own benefit. I located the ideal parcel of land, a vast, picturesque acreage adjacent to a pristine lake, boasting its own gradually descending private beach and sufficient shoreline to construct a robust, tasteful fishing dock. The residence itself was my crowning achievement, designed for comfort, aesthetic appeal, and, ironically, security. It was situated a considerable distance from the access road, concealed by a natural berm and mature trees, with a solitary, strong automated gate protecting the long, meandering driveway. This was more than a mere house. It was my haven, my recompense for decades of painstaking effort. And, significantly, at the time I acquired this land and constructed my dwelling, no HOA was in existence. Not one. It was an enclave of delightful autonomy. The difficulties, as they so often do, materialized gradually, akin to an invasive weed. Several years subsequent to my settling in, a new housing development emerged on the opposite shore of the lake, and accompanying it was the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. I was not a member. My property significantly predated its establishment, and I harbored no desire to join. My land was unambiguously, legally, and geographically distinct. I extended them my best wishes from afar, a very considerable distance. My first direct communication from them arrived as a courteous, if somewhat presumptuous, letter inviting me to become a member of their association. I politely refused. Following that, another letter suggested I might consider contributing to their community enhancement fund. I refused that as well, perhaps with slightly less politeness. The primary adversary in this suburban saga, the self-appointed matriarch of the Lakeview Estates HOA, was a woman named Brenda McMasters. Brenda was, to state it mildly, quite a personality. She operated a pearlescent white Escalade that invariably appeared to have been recently and aggressively waxed. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of expensive-looking leisure suits in hues that nature never intended for textiles. Imagine radioactive coral and electric lime. She sported a helmet of impeccably coiffed blonde hair that defied both wind and, seemingly, gravity, along with a smile that failed to genuinely reach her eyes. Her eyes, you understand, were perpetually calculating, constantly evaluating, ceaselessly searching for an advantage. She conducted herself with the demeanor of a minor sovereign reigning over her newly paved fiefdom. The initial indication that Brenda's aspirations reached beyond the meticulously kept lawns of Lakeview Estates emerged subtly. I would, on occasion, observe unfamiliar vehicles parked just beyond my property boundary near the main thoroughfare, their occupants gazing wistfully toward my lakefront. Then, one Saturday morning, while I was savoring coffee on my veranda with its lake vista, I observed them. Two men, fishing rods in hand, ambling along my beach as though it were their own. I am not an irrational individual. I descended, introduced myself, and courteously clarified that this was private land. They appeared genuinely taken aback, uttered a mumbled apology, and departed. I attributed it to an innocent error. Perhaps they had strayed from a public access point situated further along the lake, although my property was distinctly demarcated. A week thereafter, it was a family accompanied by a small, yapping dog that developed an instant aversion to my award-winning roses. On this occasion, the exchange was less amicable. The father, a stout man in an overly snug fishing vest, gestured indeterminately. Brenda said it was okay, he declared, said it was a community lake. I corrected him with firmness. This particular segment of the lakefront is private property, mine. In fact, the community lake access for Lakeview Estates is located on the opposite side. He grumbled but eventually gathered his family and withdrew. The invocation of Brenda's name registered as a minor warning signal. The true revelation occurred a few days later. I was examining security recordings, a practice ingrained from my professional life, after noticing some new refuse near my dock. There she was, Brenda McMasters, bold as brass, at my main gate. She was not attempting to use the intercom. She was not endeavoring to scale it. She calmly retrieved a key, inserted it into the manual override lock, a lock I seldom employed but kept functional for emergencies, and unlatched my gate. She then guided a small contingent of people through, gesturing expansively toward my beach and dock as if she were a tour director showcasing a newly acquired public park. She even possessed the temerity to relock the gate after them. A chill ran down my spine. That was my key, or rather, a duplicate of it. Only a few master keys existed, one in my possession, one securely stored in my safe, and one with my trusted head gardener, an elderly gentleman named Miguel who had served me for years and was the epitome of discretion. The lock was a high-security Medico, not something one can simply replicate at the local hardware store without authorization. Someone had pilfered my gate key, duplicated it, and Brenda was now functioning as the custodian of my private haven. I abruptly felt as though the security I had so meticulously engineered was merely a flimsy stage prop. The feeling of violation was intense. This was not mere trespassing, this was a premeditated intrusion orchestrated by the queen of lime green leisure suits herself. The confrontation, I perceived with a sinking heart, had just commenced, and I had a strong sense that Brenda was oblivious to the hornet's nest she was disturbing. My initial reaction, cultivated through years of managing intricate projects and even more intricate personalities, was to collect data before addressing the matter directly. The image of Brenda casually employing a key to my private gate, treating my estate like a public right-of-way, was exasperating, yet unadulterated fury would not resolve the situation. I required a thorough understanding of the problem's extent. That evening, I scrutinized several days of security recordings from various cameras overseeing my gate, driveway, and lakefront. The discoveries were astounding. These were not merely a handful of sporadic events. Brenda, or another individual using a key, was unlatching my gate numerous times each day. Throngs of people, families with children, groups of teenagers, older couples with picnic hampers were pouring onto my beach, utilizing my dock, with some even bringing inflatable rafts and loud music. My private retreat had been transformed into the unofficial Lakeview Estates Beach Club. The most galling aspect was their complete absence of consideration. They would abandon food containers, empty beverage cans, and discarded fishing tackle. My meticulously cared-for beach was beginning to exhibit erosion from the heightened pedestrian activity. The flowerbeds near the beach access were trampled. My custom-built teak dock bore fresh abrasions and what appeared suspiciously like fish entrails ground into the timber. It was as if they considered their access an inherent right and my property simply the location for their leisure. The sheer sense of entitlement was astonishing. The subsequent morning, I resolved that a direct, yet resolute, discussion with Brenda McMasters was necessary. I drove to the Lakeview Estates Community Center, an unassuming structure with an excessively grand sign. Her Escalade was parked conspicuously near the main door. I located her presiding in a small office, encircled by what I took to be other HOA board members, an assembly of vaguely stressed-looking individuals who appeared to revolve around Brenda like anxious celestial bodies. "Brenda," I commenced, maintaining an even tone, "we need to discuss your members trespassing on my property." She offered me that maddeningly serene smile. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, so kind of you to visit. Trespassing? I find that such a forceful term. We prefer to consider it community sharing." One of her attendants, a slender woman with apprehensive eyes, interjected, "The lake is for everyone after all." "My land adjoining the lake, however, is not," I asserted, "and your members are gaining entry to it via my private, locked gate. A gate, I might add, for which you apparently possess a key." Brenda waved a dismissive hand, decorated with several substantial gold-toned rings. Now, let's not become entangled in specifics. Your property is so extensive, Mr. Harrison. Acres upon acres. Surely there is adequate space for everyone. You employ gardeners, they can manage the tidying. You will scarcely perceive a few additional individuals appreciating the delightful vista. Consider it an act of fostering goodwill. I gazed at her, momentarily rendered speechless by her audacity. Brenda, I stated, my voice dangerously composed, you are enabling unlawful entry onto my land. That key you possess was acquired through illicit means. I demand that this cease immediately, and I demand the return of that key and any duplicates. Her smile constricted. Oh, I think not. The Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club is proving immensely popular. Our members are thrilled with the new access. It has genuinely enhanced community spirit. The what? I inquired, incredulous. The Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club, she reiterated, beaming as though she had just declared a Nobel laureate. A small initiative of mine that provides everyone an opportunity to enjoy the finest part of the lake. Your part. The casual acknowledgement that she had, in essence, established a club predicated on the unlawful utilization of my property was the instant I realized any endeavor at a sensible, neighborly resolution was futile. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, orchestrated appropriation of access to and enjoyment of my land. You're not even part of our petty HOA, she appended, as if that somehow excused her conduct, a subtle taunt to remind me of my outsider status. And you acquired your property before this HOA even came into being. Consequently, you fail to comprehend our community's necessities. The reasoning was so contorted it was nearly a form of art. My pre-existing rights were, in her view, somehow a liability. My legal position, Brenda, is unequivocally clear, I retorted, and it will become even more so if this persists. Regard this as your sole informal admonition. She actually let out a chuckle. Admonitions? Oh, Mr. Harrison, you architects do tend towards the dramatic. Don't trouble your handsome head about it. Everything is proceeding splendidly. I departed from her office, the faint aroma of her potent perfume and the reverberations of her disdain clinging to me like inferior cologne. It was manifest she viewed me as a trivial irritation, easily brushed aside. She was utterly unaware of the hornet's nest she was agitating with a very costly, very ill-gotten key. Upon returning home, I contacted Miguel, my head gardener. He was profoundly troubled. His key was present and accounted for, securely locked away in its usual place. He avowed that no one else had had access to it. This indicated that the original key stolen was likely mine, perhaps taken during a brief lapse of attention, or through a more deliberate act I had not yet discerned. The notion made my flesh creep. The foremost priority was to enhance security and commence meticulous documentation of everything. I possessed high-resolution motion-activated cameras, but I resolved to augment them. I procured additional units to cover every conceivable vantage point of the gate, the driveway, the beach, and the dock. I initiated a comprehensive log, recording dates, times, the number of individuals, and taking photographs of litter and damage. I even acquired a high-quality drone equipped with a zoom lens, ensuring I operated it lawfully within my own property confines to obtain unambiguous images of the Fishing and Recreation Club in full operation. The recordings were damning. People establishing elaborate picnics, children running amok, even an individual attempting to moor a small, loud jet ski to my fishing dock. My beautiful, serene lakeside was transforming into a public disturbance, all thanks to Brenda McMasters and her purloined key. The "you have gardeners anyway" remark particularly grated on me. It was not merely about the disorder. It concerned the absolute disrespect for my property, my privacy, and the effort invested in its upkeep. My gardeners were proficient horticulturists, not a private refuse collection service for an entitled HOA. I determined it was time to engage legal counsel. This situation was not going to be rectified with polite entreaties. It would necessitate a considerably more assertive approach, supported by the complete authority of the law. I knew an attorney, Arthur Kingsley, a member of an older school of legal practitioners, incisive, unyielding, and possessing a profound comprehension of property rights, and, more crucially, how to handle bullies who presumed they were above the law. Arthur, I surmised, would find Brenda McMasters especially engaging. The game, as it is said, was underway, and I was resolved to prevail. Arthur Kingsley absorbed my account with an expression that transitioned from mild curiosity to keen concentration, his sharp eyes not missing a single detail. He was a man who valued exactitude, and my architect's precision, coupled with the initial evidence I had already compiled, provided him with a strong starting point. The drone recordings of the Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club in full operation, complete with timestamps and GPS coordinates verifying that all activities were occurring well within my property boundaries, caused his eyebrows to lift in a manner that indicated both professional intrigue and a hint of grim contentment. "Brenda McMasters," he pondered, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad after I had concluded. "Sounds like a quintessential case. Overstepping, entitlement, and a basic misapprehension of the term mine. She contends that the size of my property nullifies my right to exclusivity," I stated. "And she actually informed me, you have gardeners anyway, as if that absolves them of any accountability for the mess and destruction." Arthur let out a dry, raspy chuckle. "The burden of abundance defense. How charming. And the stolen key is the crucial element. We must determine precisely how that was achieved, not merely for the trespassing, but for potential charges of conversion or even larceny, contingent on the particulars." Our initial formal action was a meticulously worded cease and desist letter. It was a masterpiece of legal prose, courteous yet entirely inflexible, enumerating the persistent trespassing, the unlawful use of a copied key, the specific laws being infringed upon, and the unequivocal demand for all such activities to cease forthwith. It also required the surrender of all keys, a tally of how many had been produced, and a roster of individuals to whom they had been issued. We dispatched it via certified mail with return receipt requested, addressed to Brenda McMasters in her official role as HOA president, and to every known board member. Brenda's reply, when it arrived, was not a communication from an attorney. It was a handwritten message on Lakeview Estates HOA letterhead, penned in an excessively florid script with what appeared to be a glitter pen. It stated, in its entirety, "Dear Mr. Harrison, thank you for your input. The community appreciates the lake access. We will take your concerns under advisement. Cordially, Brenda McMasters, President." Under advisement. It was the suburban counterpart to talk to the hand. "She is either extraordinarily conceited or extraordinarily naive," Arthur observed, regarding the sparkly missive with contempt. "Potentially both. This significantly bolsters our case. It shows a deliberate disregard for a formal legal notice. The trespassing persisted without decline. In fact, it appeared to intensify. Perhaps Brenda, emboldened by her own effrontery, had resolved to escalate matters. My newly installed cameras documented even greater activity. I observed individuals attempting to force open the door to my boathouse. One enterprising person was trying to erect a volleyball net between two of my venerable oak trees. The Fishing and Recreation Club was evidently broadening its range of leisure pursuits. The damage was also escalating. The beach appeared worn and tattered. My dock was accumulating further dents and blemishes, and the unceasing presence of unknown individuals had destroyed the tranquility I so valued. My inquiry into the key theft evolved into a quiet preoccupation. I scrutinized gate logs, comparing them with my own whereabouts and those of my personnel. I conferred again with Miguel, who was as bewildered and incensed as I. Then, a minor advancement occurred. Miguel recalled that a new landscaping team, engaged by the HOA for the common grounds of Lakeview Estates, had been laboring near my property line approximately 2 months earlier, just before the trespassing commenced in earnest. One of them had approached him at the gate, requesting a drink of water and engaging in casual conversation. Miguel, being a kind-hearted man, had complied. His own gate key was on a lanyard around his neck, tucked into his shirt. He had not taken it off, but my primary gate control panel, the one with the manual key override, was situated just inside the gate. Was it conceivable that someone had previously observed me using the physical key, noted its position, and exploited the distraction of Miguel to somehow gain access to it, or to the spare I maintained in a small, locked maintenance box just inside the gate for emergency contractor use? I directed my security footage analysis to that time frame, and there it was, a grainy yet recognizable image. During the brief exchange with Miguel, another member of that landscaping crew, unnoticed by Miguel who was occupied with the water, had sidled near the gate's pedestrian entrance. He was present for fewer than 30 seconds, manipulating something near the maintenance box. The box itself possessed a fairly ordinary lock, nothing akin to the Medico on the main gate mechanism. I inspected the box. The spare key was absent. This was not an elaborate circumvention of my Medico system. It was a common, opportunistic theft of a concealed spare, likely by someone who knew its location or chanced upon it. And who would instruct a landscaping crew member or be informed by one? The HOA. Brenda. The conclusive evidence we had been seeking materialized in an unforeseen manner. One of my few acquaintances within Lakeview Estates, a reserved retiree named Mr. Henderson, with whom I occasionally conversed when he walked his dog on the public thoroughfare, approached me one afternoon, appearing anxious. "Mr. Harrison," he started, I believe I should show you this." He presented me with a copy of the most recent Lakeview Estates HOA newsletter. There, on the front page, beneath a beaming photograph of Brenda McMasters severing a ceremonial ribbon, tied, I assure you, to a fishing rod embedded in the sand, was an article headlined, "Grand Opening of the Lakeview Estates Fishing and Recreation Club, Your New Lakeside Paradise." The piece proceeded to detail the magnanimous new access to the premier fishing and beach location on the lake, complete with directions that implicitly guided one to my gate. It even noted a nominal annual club membership fee of $50 per household to contribute to maintenance and insurance. Insurance for trespassing on my land. They were capitalizing on their transgression. Arthur's eyes illuminated like a festive display when I presented him with the newsletter. "Oh, this is exquisite," he remarked, almost with reverence. "They are not merely trespassing. They are operating a commercial venture, utilizing your property as the principal asset, and they are documenting it themselves. Brenda McMasters may well be the gift that perpetually gives." The newsletter also stated that access fobs, which I now understood were duplicates of my keys, were obtainable by all members in good standing. This was not just a handful of keys. This was potentially hundreds. The sheer magnitude of it was staggering. We now possessed proof of willful trespass, organized operations, potential theft, and now unequivocal evidence that they were deriving profit from it and had distributed keys extensively. Arthur reclined in his chair. "Very well, Mr. Harrison. I am confident we possess more than sufficient grounds to move forward. We are beyond cease and desist letters. It is time to initiate legal proceedings. And we are not merely seeking an injunction. We are pursuing damages. Substantial damages. This is not solely about halting their actions. It is about ensuring they comprehend the severity of their conduct." The prospect of a lengthy legal confrontation was unappealing. Yet the notion of Brenda and her club persisting in violating my home was even less so. "Let's proceed, Arthur," I declared. "Let them discover the consequences of mistaking an architect's forbearance for frailty." My determination had solidified from exasperation into unyielding resolve. Brenda desired a confrontation. She was about to face one she could not conceivably win. The lawsuit arrived on Brenda McMasters' desk with the finesse of a falling anvil. Arthur had composed a complaint that was simultaneously a legal battering ram and a piece of meticulous craftsmanship, enumerating every offense. From the initial trespass to the theft of the key, the formation of the Fishing and Recreation Club, the extensive dissemination of copied keys, the destruction of my property, the deprivation of quiet enjoyment, and the unjust enrichment derived from their club dues. We were not solely suing the HOA, we were also investigating methods to hold Brenda and pivotal board members personally accountable. Considering the proof of their direct participation and deliberate indifference, the amount we were seeking for damages, encompassing property restoration, diminished value, punitive damages for the flagrant behavior, legal expenses, and emotional distress, was considerable. Although we had not yet established the exact $20 million sum that would emerge later with thorough valuations and expert testimonies, the HOA's preliminary reply, conveyed by their newly retained, rather flustered-looking attorney, was characterized by bluster and denial. They asserted that the access was historical, a patent untruth easily refuted by property deeds. They contended that my security arrangements were excessive and unneighborly. They even had the audacity to insinuate that I was generating a nuisance by refusing the community access to what they now depicted as a de facto public amenity. It was a textbook example of diversion and assigning blame to the victim. Brenda, I learned through informal channels, was informing everyone in Lakeview Estates that this was merely a trivial misunderstanding being exaggerated by a reclusive millionaire. The discovery phase was where our scrupulous preparation truly began to demonstrate its worth. My comprehensive video archive, cataloged and cross-referenced, became Exhibit A. Hours of recordings depicted a veritable legion of Lakeview Estates residents treating my property as if it were a public fairground. The drone images, exceptionally clear and professionally compiled, were particularly incriminating, illustrating the sheer extent of the incursions and the damage inflicted. My logs itemized every piece of refuse gathered, every plant crushed, every abrasion on my dock. We possessed sworn statements from Miguel and other staff members. We even had the notorious HOA newsletter featuring Brenda's smiling countenance directly above the declaration of her unlawful enterprise. Depositions were, for me, a high point of restrained indignation. Brenda McMasters presented herself in a power suit the shade of a chemically augmented sunset, her assurance seemingly intact. Under Arthur's courteous yet surgically incisive questioning, however, her self-possession started to unravel. Mrs. McMasters, Arthur commenced, his tone deceptively gentle. Could you elucidate the means by which the Lakeview Estates HOA acquired a key to Mr. Harrison's private, secured gate? Brenda offered a vague smile. It was made accessible for community advantage. Made accessible by whom, Mrs. McMasters? Arthur persisted. These things, you are aware, they occasionally just materialize when a necessity arises. Arthur pressed further. Are you cognizant that Mr. Harrison reported a key stolen from a secure maintenance box on his premises? I hear all manner of gossip, Mr. Kingsley. Most of it is merely inconsequential chatter. However, when Arthur showed her enlarged still frames from my security footage depicting the landscaping crew member at the gate box and subsequently linked that crew to HOA contracts, her composure fractured. She became flustered, speaking of misinterpretations and unrelated occurrences. When he presented the newsletter promoting the Fishing and Recreation Club and interrogated her about the nominal annual club fee, she asserted it was for insurance and general community functions, refuting that it was connected to accessing my property, an assertion directly at odds with the newsletter's own phrasing. Her testimony was a convoluted fabrication of evasiveness and outright falsehoods, all meticulously documented by the court reporter. The HOA board members, when subjected to deposition, were a lamentable group. Most endeavored to disassociate themselves, asserting that Brenda was the instigator and they were merely complying with her directives. Some conceded under duress that they harbored misgivings but were either too cowed or too indifferent to oppose her. It depicted a distinct scenario of an HOA commandeered by an overly zealous president and facilitated by a submissive board. The HOA's legal representative attempted a few countermeasures. They sought to lodge a nuisance complaint against me alleging unreasonable limitations on lake access, a desperate tactic that the judge dismissed almost instantly given the unambiguous nature of my property rights. They contended that the damages we were asserting were conjectural and inflated. This is where my expertise in high-end property development and my comprehension of valuation proved particularly beneficial. We engaged expert appraisers to evaluate the reduction in my property's worth resulting from the extended, publicized trespass and the perceived public accessibility of my private beach. They calculated the expenses for restoring the beach, mending the dock, replanting damaged flora, and enhancing security to forestall future intrusions. We also hired a forensic accountant to scrutinize the HOA's financial records, especially those pertaining to the Fishing and Recreation Club fees. While $50 per household did not seem substantial individually, when multiplied by several hundred residences over the duration, it amounted to a significant sum. More critically, it established intent and a profit motive. The strain was evidently affecting the Lakeview Estates community. Whispers began to spread concerning enormous legal costs and the possibility of a colossal special assessment should they lose the lawsuit. Some residents, such as Mr. Henderson, quietly conveyed their backing for me, conceding they had always been uneasy with Brenda's stratagem but felt incapable of acting. One anonymous parcel even found its way to Arthur's office, containing internal HOA emails wherein Brenda explicitly discussed liberating my lakefront for the good of the community and dismissed potential legal repercussions as scare tactics from a rich recluse. This unsolicited contribution was invaluable, demonstrating premeditation and malice. As the trial date neared, Arthur expressed confidence. Brenda's arrogance is her undoing, he informed me. She genuinely convinced herself she has committed no wrong or that her intentions somehow validate her actions. The evidence, however, narrates a very different, very costly tale. We refined our computation of damages. The expense to mend the physical harm to the beach shoreline, which possessed specific environmental safeguards due to uncommon aquatic plants disturbed by the trespassers, and the dock was considerable. The deprivation of quiet enjoyment for over a year was assessed at a high value. The temporary and potentially, if uncorrected, permanent blemish associated with the property as having contested access significantly diminished its market worth in the multimillion-dollar bracket. Then there were punitive damages. Arthur clarified that Brenda's and the HOA's behavior, the theft, the deceptions, the flagrant contempt for legal notices, the endeavor to profit, was precisely the type of conduct punitive damages are intended to penalize and discourage. We targeted a sum that would not only recompense me but also transmit an unequivocal signal. That sum, meticulously computed and strongly substantiated by expert testimony and evidence, was $20 million. It registered as an immense amount, yet when one dissected the actual detriment, the depreciation of a distinctive multi-million-dollar estate, and the sheer, unmitigated impudence of the defendants, it started to appear entirely justified. The scene was prepared for a confrontation, and Brenda McMasters was on the verge of discovering that certain gates, once unlatched, release forces far exceeding her capacity to manage. The courtroom environment was less theatrical than television might suggest, yet the atmosphere was thick with tension. Brenda McMasters made her daily entrance in a new, powerfully colored outfit, her facial expression a meticulously maintained facade of assured outrage. Her HOA board associates appeared progressively more unwell. On my side of the courtroom were Arthur, myself, and our contingent of specialists, equipped with volumes of evidence, deposition transcripts, and carefully prepared arguments. Arthur's introductory remarks were a superb demonstration of restrained authority. He presented the facts calmly and sequentially, depicting not a mere disagreement over boundaries, but a deliberate, prolonged campaign of trespassing, conversion of property, and willful defiance of property rights, masterminded by an HOA president intoxicated by her own inflated sense of power. He utilized my security recordings judiciously but powerfully, displaying for the court pivotal instances. Brenda herself employing the copied key, the sheer multitude of individuals on my beach, the casual destruction being wrought. The notorious HOA newsletter, enlarged on a substantial display, elicited murmurs from the observers in the public gallery. Our specialists delivered their testimonies in a systematic manner. The land surveyor validated my property demarcations with undeniable accuracy. The environmental consultant elaborated on the harm to the delicate shoreline habitat, projecting substantial costs for remediation. The real estate appraiser clarified how the HOA's conduct and the attendant publicity surrounding the fishing and recreation club had cast a shadow over my property title and demonstrably diminished its market worth by several $1,000,000, necessitating legal intervention and public correction to reinstate its value. He discussed stigma damages and the forfeiture of the singular exclusivity and privacy that justified the premium valuation of such an estate. My head gardener, Miguel, provided sincere testimony regarding the condition of the grounds and the anguish it inflicted upon him. When Brenda took the witness stand, it was evident she still harbored the belief that she could charm or intimidate her way through the proceedings. She depicted herself as a champion of the community, contending for the common person against an affluent landowner monopolizing a natural asset. Under Arthur's cross-examination, however, her constructed narrative disintegrated. He challenged her with her deposition statements, underscoring the inconsistencies and blatant untruths. He presented the internal emails, those from the anonymous informant, in which she cavalierly dismissed legal hazards. "Mrs. McMasters?" Arthur inquired, his voice subdued yet audible throughout the courtroom. "This email here, dated 3 weeks after you received our cease and desist letter, you state, and I quote, 'Harrison can huff and puff, but he won't blow our little club down. The lake belongs to the people.' Did I read that correctly?" Brenda's face turned a perilous shade of magenta that clashed dreadfully with her teal jacket. I may have been articulating frustration with his reluctance to share. frustration, Mrs. McMasters, or an unambiguous declaration of intent to persist in your unlawful activities despite being cautioned by legal counsel? Her attorney raised objections repeatedly, but the judge, a formidable, no-nonsense woman who had clearly reviewed all pretrial submissions, overruled him more frequently than not. Brenda's credibility was visibly eroding. The HOA's defense was insubstantial. Their legal representative attempted to assert that the damage was negligible, that the club fees were unconnected, and that my assertions were inflated, but they lacked credible witnesses to challenge our evidence, offered no believable account for the stolen key, and provided no justification for the newsletter. Their own board members, when summoned, reluctantly corroborated Brenda's prevailing influence and their own deficient supervision. One of the most persuasive items of evidence, almost serendipitously, was a photograph I had captured before the HOA's existence. It depicted my immaculate beach, the untouched shoreline, and the serene water mirroring a flawless blue sky. Arthur juxtaposed this with a recent drone image displaying the eroded sand, the trampled flora, the refuse, and the overall appearance of a disregarded public park. The visual disparity was striking and highly informative. The computation of the $20 million in damages was presented systematically. 1. Property restoration and environmental remediation, approximately $2.5 million. This encompassed reconstructing sections of the beach, extensive replanting of indigenous species along the shoreline, some of which were rare and necessitated specialist nurseries, mending the dock, and thorough cleaning. 2. Diminution of property value. Expert testimony assessed this at $7 million. Even with the cessation of trespassing, the history of the conflict and the necessity for continuous vigilance had a concrete adverse effect on the desirability and marketability of such a high-value private estate. 3. Loss of quiet enjoyment and emotional distress, calculated over the nearly 2-year span of intense disturbance. This was appraised at $1.5 million. My residence, my refuge, had been desecrated. 4. Disgorgement of unjust enrichment. The club fees amassed, though not immense, augmented by a multiplier for the illicit advantage gained, totaled $500,000. 5. Legal fees. Arthur's firm, along with expert witness expenditures, were estimated to be around $1.5 million due to the intricacy and contentious character of the lawsuit. 6. Punitive damages. This constituted the largest element. Arthur contended that the HOA's behavior was malicious, oppressive, and fraudulent, justifying a substantial punitive award to discourage them and others from analogous conduct. He requested $7 million for this component, bringing the aggregate to $20 million. He maintained that any lesser sum would not serve as an adequate deterrent for an entity that had demonstrated such disdain for the law and private property rights. The judge paid close attention to the concluding statements. Arthur encapsulated our case with devastating lucidity. The HOA's attorney delivered a somewhat desperate entreaty depicting the HOA as a modest community entity being overwhelmed by an affluent individual. The period awaiting the judgment was excruciating, not due to any doubt about our case, but because a great deal hinged upon it, not solely the monetary sum, but the underlying principle. When the judge finally announced her decision, she did not equivocate. She found comprehensively in my favor on every point. She referenced the compelling evidence of trespass, the unambiguous proof of conversion concerning the key, and the astounding arrogance and bad faith exhibited by the HOA president and, by implication, the board for its dereliction of duty. She characterized Brenda's conduct as a campaign of harassment and unlawful seizure. And then she addressed the damages. She reviewed each classification. She granted the full sums for restoration, diminution of value, loss of enjoyment, and legal fees. For disgorgement, she marginally increased it, citing the HOA's lack of candor. And for punitive damages, she looked directly at Brenda, who had turned ashen. The court finds, the judge declared, her voice resolute, that the conduct of the Lakeview Estates HOA, spearheaded by its president, was indeed malicious, oppressive, and undertaken with a conscious disregard for the rights of Mr. Harrison. This court must send a message that such behavior will not be tolerated. She awarded the entire $7 million in punitive damages. The grand total, $20 million. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Brenda appeared as if she had been struck by lightning. Her lawyer was furiously taking notes. Arthur gave my arm a subtle press. Vindication. It was a potent, purifying sensation. The gavel descended and it was concluded. Or rather, that segment was. The repercussions were only just commencing for the Lakeview Estates HOA. The repercussions of the $20 million judgment were, as anticipated, disastrous for the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association and its erstwhile queen, Brenda McMasters. The information propagated through the local vicinity like an uncontrolled blaze. Brenda was promptly and very openly removed as HOA president. I learned she attempted to contend that the HOA's insurance would absorb the cost, but the insurer, upon examining the judgment and the character of the willful, malicious actions, rejected the claim, asserting that intentional misconduct was not covered. This left the HOA members themselves responsible for the debt. The HOA board, now in a state of utter alarm, convened emergency sessions. The figures were stark. $20 million distributed among a few hundred residences signified a special assessment that was financially calamitous for the majority of homeowners. We are discussing amounts that likely surpassed the equity many possessed in their dwellings. Houses began to appear on the market almost at once, frequently at reduced prices as residents sought to evade the approaching financial cataclysm. The community cohesion Brenda had so proudly promoted dissipated, supplanted by fury, blame, and apprehension. Brenda McMasters herself did not evade personal repercussions. While the majority of the judgment was levied against the HOA as a corporate body, Arthur had established the basis to pursue her individually for her direct involvement and the unambiguous proof of her malicious intent, particularly regarding the misuse of club funds and the deceptive statements she had made. Confronted with potential personal insolvency and additional legal proceedings, she divested herself of her pearlescent Escalade. I observed it advertised online as a distress sale and her aggressively contemporary house. She vanished from the local area quite rapidly, reportedly relocating several states distant. The epic of the electric lime leisure suit was formally concluded in our locality. The Lakeview Estates HOA as an entity effectively disintegrated. Numerous residents declined to remit the exorbitant special assessment, resulting in liens, foreclosures, and a thorough collapse of HOA administration. Ultimately, the HOA was compelled into receivership. My $20 million judgment constituted a principal claim against its holdings, which were scant beyond the common areas. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, brokered a resolution wherein the HOA transferred its common properties, including their actual, legitimate lake access point on the opposite side of the lake, to a newly established, court-overseen trust charged with liquidating assets to satisfy creditors, chiefly myself. We understood we would not receive the entire $20 million in currency, but the conveyance of their own esteemed lakefront property to partially settle the obligation was an irony too delightful to overlook. They had attempted to seize my lakefront, now they had forfeited theirs as a consequence. On my own behalf, I commenced the gradual undertaking of restoring my property and my tranquility. The restoration efforts were substantial but therapeutic. The beach was recontoured and replanted. The shoreline's fragile ecosystem initiated its recuperation under professional supervision. My dock was mended to its previous condition. New, even more robust security installations were put in place, though I doubted I would encounter much further difficulty from Lakeview Estates. The transferred HOA common land, encompassing their former beach, eventually transformed into a modest public conservation zone administered by a local land trust, guaranteeing its proper maintenance. A significantly superior result than Brenda's disorderly fishing and recreation club. The insights gained were substantial. Firstly, meticulous record-keeping is one's most potent defense against arrogance and falsehood. My cameras, my journals, my drone imagery. They served as the silent, undeniable evidence that dismantled Brenda's entire deception. Secondly, never misjudge the extremes to which entitled persons will proceed to obtain their desires, nor the degree of their self-delusion. Brenda genuinely appeared to consider her actions defensible. Thirdly, proficient legal representation is invaluable. Arthur Kingsley was a tenacious advocate in a tailored suit, and his strategic insight was crucial. The broader community, I believe, also absorbed a lesson. There was an observable alteration in the operational methods of HOAs in the vicinity, a renewed deference for property boundaries and individual entitlements. My lawsuit became a regional cautionary narrative, the Harrison Judgment, as it came to be known. A stark admonition of the repercussions of overstepping authority and misuse of power. Some of the more sensible former inhabitants of Lakeview Estates, those who had been disquieted by Brenda's dominion but felt unable to act, actually contacted me to express remorse for what had transpired, an overture I valued. My sanctuary is tranquil once more. The gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, the cry of the loons, the whisper of leaves in the wind. These are the sole sounds that now pervade my property. The Fishing and Recreation Club is a remote, almost farcical recollection, a monument to the sheer, unadulterated audacity that ultimately cost its creators everything. It was an extended, costly, and demanding struggle, but witnessing justice prevail, observing my haven restored, and knowing that a petty despot received her just deserts, that, my friends, was worth every element of the fight.